Islam lies the concept of Tawhid, which signifies the absolute oneness, at the heart of Islam's core monotheism. The quest for recognition. Unpacking misconceptions and barriers to understanding Islam. Executive summary. Islam, a faith deeply rooted in monotheism and the Abrahamic tradition, often faces significant misunderstanding and negative perceptions despite its foundational principles. This report meticulously examines the multifaceted reasons behind the limited recognition of Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion. It highlights that while Islam fundamentally aligns with other Abrahamic faiths in its belief in a single, supreme deity, its unique theological interpretations and historical trajectory present conceptual challenges for external understanding. The analysis reveals that prevalent negative perceptions are fueled by a complex interplay of sensationalized media portrayals, deeply ingrained historical narratives, cultural and linguistic distances, the disproportionate impact of extremist actions, and underlying sociological dynamics of religious stratification. Current efforts through interfaith dialogue and educational initiatives are crucial but face significant hurdles, including the rapid spread of misinformation and the multi-generational entrenchment of biases. Ultimately, achieving broader recognition for Islam necessitates a sustained, multifaceted approach involving proactive education, strategic communication, deepened interfaith engagement, cultural bridge-building, and a systemic challenge to Islamophobia. Introduction. Islam's monotheistic and Abrahamic foundations. Islam stands as one of the world's major Abrahamic religions, alongside Judaism and Christianity, all united by the central belief in a single, supreme deity. This foundational understanding is critical for contextualizing the widespread misunderstandings and the perceived lack of recognition that the faith often encounters. Islam's core monotheistic principle, Tawhid. At the heart of Islam lies the concept of Tawhid, which signifies the absolute oneness, indivisibility, and uniqueness of God, referred to in Arabic as Allah. This principle is not merely a theological statement, but the singular most important concept upon which a Muslim's entire religious adherence rests. The declaration of faith, the Shahada, unequivocally asserts, "There is no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet," embodying this core tenet. The Quran consistently emphasizes Allah's singularity, sole sovereignty, and attributes such as being the creator, judge, rewarder, unique, omnipotent, and all-merciful. Islamic worship practices are strictly governed by Tawhid al-Uluhiyya, the oneness of worship, which mandates that only Allah is worthy of devotion, explicitly forbidding the worship of partners, idols, images, or statues. This strict monotheism, while foundational to Islam, inherently presents a conceptual divergence from other Abrahamic faiths, particularly Christianity's Trinitarian doctrine, and from polytheistic traditions. The Quran's assertion that nothing is like unto him establishes a theological boundary that can be difficult for individuals from different religious frameworks to fully grasp. For many non-Muslims, comprehending Islam on its own terms often requires a significant shift in their pre-existing theological paradigms, which can be a challenging cognitive and spiritual hurdle. This fundamental theological difference, while a core strength of Islam, can thus become an epistemological challenge for those attempting to understand the faith, potentially leading to a perception of otherness, rather than a shared Abrahamic heritage. Efforts to foster greater recognition must therefore address not just factual inaccuracies, but also deeply ingrained theological frameworks that may struggle to accommodate Tawhid's absolute singularity. Islam as an Abrahamic tradition. Islam deeply reveres Abraham, known as Ibrahim, as a pivotal prophet and messenger of God. He is acknowledged as an ancestor to both Ishmaelite Arabs and Israelites, and is held up as an exemplary figure of unwavering faith, having fulfilled all divine commandments and trials throughout his lifetime. The Quran consistently refers to Islam as the religion of Abraham, Milad Ibrahim, and bestows upon Abraham titles such as Hanif, the pure, true in faith, or upright man, and Khalil Allah, friend of God. A cornerstone of Islamic belief is that Abraham and his son Ishmael were instrumental in constructing the Kaaba in Mecca, establishing it as the first house of worship dedicated to monotheism. The Islamic holy day of Eid al-Adha further commemorates Abraham's profound willingness to sacrifice his son in obedience to God's command. Despite this profound emphasis on shared Abrahamic lineage and monotheistic belief with Judaism and Christianity, Islam also asserts that the messages and scriptures conveyed through earlier prophets, such as those in the Torah and Gospels, underwent corruption, necessitating the final revelation of the Quran through Prophet Muhammad. This simultaneous claim of shared heritage and theological correction creates a complex dynamic. For non-Muslims, especially those of Christian and Jewish faiths, this assertion of corruption can be perceived as a direct challenge to the authenticity and legitimacy of their own sacred texts and traditions, rather than a continuation or culmination of a shared lineage. This perspective can inadvertently lead to a defensive posture or a rejection of Islam's claims to being the true religion of Abraham, despite the clear historical and theological connections. This theological stance, while central to Islamic self-understanding, can thus contribute to a sense of otherness, or even antagonism from other Abrahamic faiths, impeding broader recognition of Islam's legitimacy within the Abrahamic framework. Effective interfaith dialogue must navigate this delicate balance of shared roots and distinct theological claims with sensitivity, and a focus on mutual respect. The landscape of misunderstanding and negative perceptions. Public perception of Islam is frequently marred by significant misunderstanding and negative views, creating a substantial gap between how Muslims perceive their faith and how it is viewed externally. This section explores the prevalence of these perceptions and analyzes their underlying themes. Prevalence of negative perceptions. Surveys consistently indicate that a notable segment of the American public holds unfavorable views of Islam. A 2014 Barna study, for instance, reported that 36% of Americans had an unfavorable perception of Islam, compared to 33% with a favorable view and 31% who were undecided. Similarly, a Brookings study from 2011 observed a decline in favorable opinions of Islam from 47% in October 2001, shortly after the 9/11 attacks, to 33% in subsequent years, with 60% expressing an unfavorable opinion. Further data from Pew Research in 2017 revealed that Americans assigned Muslims an average favorability rating of 48 degrees, comparable to atheists' 50 degrees, but notably lower than 7 other major religious groups, including Jews, Catholics, and various Protestant denominations. This suggests a relative lack of warmth or familiarity compared to other prominent faiths. This pattern of lower favorability ratings for Islam appears to correlate with a general perception of difference or unfamiliarity. Data indicates that religions perceived as different from one's own, such as Mormonism, Buddhism, and Hinduism, also receive lower favorability ratings and are more frequently described as very different. This suggests that a lack of direct exposure or comprehensive understanding often leads to a default position of caution or skepticism toward the unknown. The Barna study further illustrates this, showing that older generations and political conservatives tend to exhibit higher unfavorable perceptions of Islam. This pattern points to an implicit bias where perceived difference is equated with less favorable, rather than necessarily active hostility. Consequently, the challenge for Islam's recognition extends beyond simply countering explicit negative stereotypes. It also involves overcoming a general societal unfamiliarity that predisposes certain segments of the population to unfavorable views. This underscores the need for educational initiatives that aim to increase exposure and understanding of Islamic practices and values in everyday contexts, thereby reducing the perception of otherness. Analysis of prevalent stereotypes and misconceptions. Numerous stereotypes and misconceptions contribute to the negative portrayal of Islam. One of the most pervasive is the association of Islam with violence and terrorism. Media often depicts a radical Muslim insurgent narrative, portraying violence as an inherent aspect of being Muslim. While over half of American adults, 53%, believe Islam is essentially a peaceful religion, a significant minority, 26%, explicitly link it with violence. However, Islamic teachings unequivocally prohibit terrorism, considering the killing of an innocent person to be among the gravest crimes after worshipping another god. Globally, the vast majority of Muslims condemn violence against civilians, with 92% in Indonesia and 91% in Iraq stating that suicide bombings are rarely or never justified. Another common misconception revolves around the oppression of women in Islam. Media frequently presents Muslim women as passive victims, or as strong feminists actively resisting male dominance, often criticizing Islam for marginalizing women. Terms such as segregated, beaten, veil, and extremism are frequently used by journalists and politicians to describe Muslim women. In contrast, Islam historically championed women's rights, granting them the right to inherit property, conduct business, and access equal education. The Quran explicitly states that men and women have the same responsibility before God. The oppression many women face in some Muslim countries is often a result of cultural tradition, not Islamic law, and Islamic law grants women the right to divorce. Furthermore, rules regarding modesty, such as wearing the hijab, are open to a wide range of interpretations and are often a personal choice driven by a desire to please God, rather than being forced. Other prevalent misconceptions include the belief that Allah is a distinct God worshipped only by Muslims. In reality, Allah simply means God in Arabic, and Muslims worship the same monotheistic God as Jews and Christians. There is also a misunderstanding that Muslims worship Prophet Muhammad. Muslims worship Allah alone. Some believe Islam condemns other religions, whereas Islamic teachings emphasize respect for other faiths and forbid ridiculing them. Lastly, Sharia law is often misunderstood, with its traditional punishments being highlighted while its broader aspects, which encompass various dimensions of life, are overlooked. Many interpretations of Sharia are diplomatic, and some perceived harsh aspects are viewed as disconnected from the true spirit of Islam. A significant factor contributing to these misunderstandings is the pervasive tendency to conflate cultural practices with core Islamic teachings. Many practices perceived as oppressive or unfamiliar, such as certain interpretations of women's roles or dress codes, are rooted in specific cultural traditions rather than universal Islamic law. This conflation stems from a lack of nuanced understanding of the immense diversity within the global Muslim community, where local customs and regional variations can diverge significantly from foundational religious texts. Organizations like the Muslim Student Association, MSA, actively address this by highlighting the distinction between culture and religion. This conflation leads to misattributing negative cultural practices to the religion itself, making it harder for outsiders to discern authentic Islamic teachings from localized customs. For effective recognition, a clearer delineation between the two is necessary, emphasizing the diversity within Islam and clarifying that cultural variations do not necessarily reflect the religion's foundational principles. To further illustrate these points, Table 1 provides a concise overview of common misconceptions and their factual clarifications. Table 1. Common misconceptions about Islam and factual clarifications. Misconception: factual clarification supporting data. Islam promotes violence and terrorism. Islam totally prohibits terrorism. Killing an innocent person is considered the greatest crime after worshipping another god. Most Muslims globally condemn violence against civilians. Islam oppresses women. Historically, Islam promoted women's rights, property, business, education. Men and women have equal responsibility before God. Oppression is often cultural, not Islamic law, and women have the right to divorce. Women are forced to wear the hijab/modest clothing. Rules on modesty are open to wide interpretation. It is often a personal desire to please God, not forced. The Quran encourages a simple headscarf and modest clothing, not mandatory face covering. Muslims' God is Allah, a different deity. Allah simply means God in Arabic. Islam springs from the same monotheistic tradition as Judaism and Christianity. Muslims worship the same God. Muslims worship Muhammad. Muslims worship Allah God alone, not Prophet Muhammad. Islam condemns other religions. Islam emphasizes respect for other religions and teaches against ridiculing other faiths. Sharia law is inherently harsh and mandatory for all. Sharia encompasses various life aspects. While some traditional punishments may seem harsh, they are often disconnected from the true spirit of Islam and are not universally applied or interpreted. Quantitative and qualitative data on public perceptions and Islamophobia. Public opinion research indicates a significant rise in Islamophobic sentiment following the events of September 11, 2001, which then stabilized in the late 2000s before increasing again after the 2010 Ground Zero Mosque controversy. Unfavorable attitudes toward Muslim Americans reached a high of 67% in 2015. The tangible impact of these sentiments is evident in the fact that hate crimes against Muslims in the United States remain 5 times more common than before September 11. A notable partisan divide exists in perceptions of Islam. Republicans are more likely than Democrats to express concern about extremism in the name of Islam, and to believe that Islam encourages violence among its adherents. Similarly, evangelical Christians hold significantly more unfavorable views of Islam compared to other religious groups. Despite these negative perceptions, a majority of Americans, nearly 7 in 10, 68%, acknowledge that extremists have unfairly distorted people's perceptions of Islam. This presents a striking contradiction. A significant portion of the public intellectually acknowledges that extremists have distorted perceptions of Islam. Yet negative views, particularly those linking Islam to violence, persist. This suggests that merely recognizing the distortion does not automatically translate into a shift in underlying sentiment or a reduction in unfavorable views. This pattern indicates that the distortion is not simply a matter of factual inaccuracy that can be corrected with information. Rather, it is deeply embedded in emotional responses, pervasive media narratives, and potentially subconscious biases that are resistant to simple factual counterarguments. The continued prevalence of hate crimes against Muslims further underscores this emotional and systemic entrenchment. This disconnect highlights the challenge of addressing Islamophobia solely through factual correction, suggesting that effective strategies must also engage with the emotional and psychological dimensions of prejudice, perhaps through personal interaction, empathy-building narratives, and addressing the root causes of fear, rather than just the symptoms of misinformation. Key factors contributing to misunderstanding and lack of recognition. The limited recognition of Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion is not attributable to a single cause, but rather to a complex interplay of systemic and historical factors. Media representation and Islamophobia. Media plays a profound role in shaping public perception. Since the turn of the millennium, particularly after September 11, media coverage of Islam has dramatically increased in both quantity and quality, often contributing to harmful stereotypes. The most prevalent stereotype is that of the radical Muslim insurgent, bent on waging jihad, holy war, against the West, which frequently portrays violence as an inherent characteristic of being Muslim. This narrative is exemplified by characters such as Saeed Jarrah in ABC's Lost, whose actions are often depicted as inherently violent despite his role as an anti-terrorism operative. The portrayal of Muslim women is another area of concern, with media often presenting them as passive victims of male power, or as feminists actively resisting oppression. Journalists and politicians frequently use terms like segregated, beaten, veil, and extremism to describe Muslim women, ignoring the diversity of their experiences and imposing Western ideals of gender and power onto a non-Western religion. This biased representation is a key component of Islamophobia, defined as an extreme fear of and hostility toward Islam and Muslims. Islamophobia is increasingly recognized in social science and public discourse as a form of anti-Muslim racism. It manifests in hate speech, hate crimes, social and political discrimination, and is used to rationalize policies such as mass surveillance. The roots of contemporary Islamophobia stretch back centuries, with negativity toward Islam and Muslims being a trademark of Western thought and attitudes for centuries. Early American racism, for instance, connected the fear of Islam to the transatlantic slave trade as a unifying concept for defining American identity. The 9/11 attacks were a pivotal moment, sharply increasing Islamophobic sentiment and drawing significant academic attention to the phenomenon. Despite a majority of Americans acknowledging that the 9/11 terrorists represented a radical fringe, 73%, overall views of Islam became more negative after the attacks. The media's selective focus on the extremist actions of a minority of Muslims overshadows the peaceful practices of the majority. This sensationalism and lack of context lead to skewed perceptions. These skewed perceptions, in turn, influence public opinion, which then reinforces the media's framing, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. The war on terrorism, for example, led to an increase in Islamophobia, which was subsequently reflected in the way media outlets addressed and stereotyped Muslim populations. This indicates that media is not merely a passive mirror of public sentiment, but an active agent in constructing and reinforcing negative stereotypes, making it significantly harder to break negative cycles. The demand for certain narratives, potentially driven by existing biases or political agendas, further solidifies this cycle. Addressing misunderstanding, therefore, requires not only challenging media narratives, but also understanding how public demand for certain narratives perpetuates this cycle. This implies a need for media literacy campaigns and advocacy for more balanced, nuanced portrayals, alongside a critical examination of the economic and political incentives that drive sensationalist reporting. Historical conflicts and legacies. Historical conflicts have left an enduring legacy of mistrust that continues to impede the recognition of Islam. The Crusades, a series of religious wars between Christians and Muslims from 1096 to 1291, were primarily fought for control of holy sites sacred to both groups. These conflicts significantly enhanced the status of European Christians and contributed to a long-standing legacy of mistrust and misunderstanding between Islamic and Western civilizations. It is important to note that Muslims and Christians often hold divergent interpretations of these historical events, highlighting the differing historical narratives that shape contemporary perceptions. Beyond the Crusades, broader historical conflicts such as colonialism and more recent geopolitical tensions have also contributed to this legacy of mistrust. These historical narratives frequently emphasize conflict over coexistence, creating a simplified, often antagonistic, historical memory that overshadows periods of cooperation and cultural exchange. A persistent criticism, particularly prominent during the Enlightenment, is the spread by the sword thesis, which portrays Islam as a bloody, ruthless, and intolerant religion that expanded primarily through violence. While early Islamic empires did expand through military conquests, historical evidence suggests that Islam often remained a minority religion in newly conquered regions for several generations, indicating that political conquest did not inherently lead to widespread religious conversion. In many regions outside the initial imperial sphere, such as sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, Islam spread predominantly through trade, cultural integration, and missionary activities, with conversions often occurring voluntarily. This nuance is frequently lost in popular discourse. These deeply ingrained historical narratives continue to inform contemporary perceptions, influencing how Islam is viewed today. Even when historians present nuanced accounts of these events, acknowledging periods of coexistence and intellectual exchange, the popular imagination often retains a simplified, conflict-driven version. This historical baggage contributes to a default negative lens through which Islam is often viewed, making it harder for its enduring legitimacy to be recognized on its own merits, as present-day interactions are filtered through a historical framework of antagonism. Overcoming this requires not just presenting facts about Islam's present, but actively re-narrating or recontextualizing historical interactions. This involves promoting historical literacy that acknowledges complexity, coexistence, and cultural exchange, rather than solely focusing on conflict. It also highlights the need for critical engagement with how historical grievances are leveraged in contemporary political discourse to fuel prejudice, cultural differences, and linguistic barriers. Cultural differences and linguistic barriers significantly contribute to the othering of Islam and Muslims. Islamic practices and customs can appear unfamiliar or even strange to individuals from different cultural backgrounds, leading to misunderstandings of religious practices, dress codes, and social norms. For instance, the hijab or daily prayer rituals may be misinterpreted without proper context. Furthermore, Islam is not a monolithic entity. It encompasses a rich diversity of practices and interpretations, including major sects like Sunni and Shia, as well as numerous regional variations. This internal diversity can be confusing to outsiders, sometimes mistakenly perceived as contradictions or a lack of coherence within the religion. This internal complexity can be seen as disunity rather than a natural evolution of a global faith with diverse cultural expressions. A significant linguistic barrier also exists. The primary religious texts of Islam, most notably the Quran, are in Arabic. Many nuances and profound meanings embedded in the original Arabic can be lost or misinterpreted in translation, leading to fundamental misunderstandings about the religion's teachings and principles. The depth of meaning in the original Arabic is often inaccessible to non-Arabic speakers, leading to simplified or erroneous interpretations that miss the spiritual and ethical richness of the faith. When practices and language are unfamiliar, they inevitably contribute to a sense of otherness. This othering is not necessarily malicious, but often stems from a lack of exposure and understanding. The difficulty in accessing the Quran in its original Arabic means that reliance on translations, which can lose nuance, leads to misinterpretations. This linguistic and cultural distance creates a barrier to authentic engagement, solidifying the perception that Muslims are different from what members of Western society should be. This implicit cultural norming, where Western cultural ideals are often the default, can create a subtle, yet pervasive, barrier to full recognition. Therefore, efforts to enhance recognition must actively bridge these cultural and linguistic gaps. This could involve promoting Arabic language education, providing context-rich explanations of Islamic practices, and fostering direct cultural exchange to normalize what might initially seem strange or alien. It also emphasizes the need for nuanced communication that acknowledges diversity within Islam rather than presenting a monolithic image. Extremist actions and political agendas. The actions of a small minority of extremists have a disproportionately large impact on global perceptions of Islam. Media's selective focus on these actions overshadows the peaceful practices and beliefs of the vast majority of Muslims worldwide. This sensationalism and lack of context create a distorted public perception, making it challenging for the peaceful reality of Islam to gain recognition. This distortion is often exacerbated by political agendas. Islamophobia can be exploited for political gain, with anti-Muslim rhetoric from politicians contributing significantly to rising anti-Muslim sentiments. For example, the controversy surrounding the proposed Ground Zero Mosque in 2010 led to a notable spike in negative attitudes toward Muslims, demonstrating how political narratives can quickly mobilize and intensify prejudice. Despite nearly 7 in 10 Americans, 68%, acknowledging that extremists have unfairly distorted people's perceptions of Islam, these negative perceptions persist, indicating the powerful influence of politically charged narratives. The impact of minority actions versus majority efforts is asymmetrical. Despite the overwhelming majority of Muslims condemning violence and extremism, the actions of a small extremist minority have a disproportionately large impact on global perceptions. This imbalance is further amplified by political agendas that leverage these actions for their own gain, intensifying fear and hostility. The media, often driven by a pursuit of sensationalism, frequently focuses on these minority actions, further solidifying negative stereotypes. This dynamic creates an incredibly difficult environment for the peaceful majority's reality to gain recognition, as the negative narratives are more easily disseminated and politically potent, creating a constant uphill battle for counter-narratives. This highlights a critical challenge. How can the positive, peaceful majority narrative effectively compete with the amplified, politically charged narrative of a violent minority? It suggests that countering misinformation requires not just education but strategic communication that acknowledges the existence of extremism while firmly divorcing it from mainstream Islamic teachings and actively promoting the voices and actions of the peaceful majority. It also points to the need for political leadership that actively counters anti-Muslim rhetoric rather than exploiting it. Sociological dynamics of religious recognition. The recognition of Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion is also shaped by broader sociological dynamics inherent in how societies perceive and categorize religious groups. Religion, beyond individual belief, functions as a social institution, an organized and integrated set of beliefs, behaviors, and norms centered on basic social needs and values. It plays a crucial role in fostering social cohesion, promoting behavioral consistency, and offering comfort and meaning during life's transitions. However, societies often exhibit religious stratification, a hierarchical organization where certain religious groups gain greater access to power, privilege, and resources than others. This is not merely a historical phenomenon but an ongoing dynamic, influenced by factors such as religious pluralism, prejudice, competition for scarce resources, e.g., adherence, land, political office, and differential power among groups. Conflict theory, notably articulated by Karl Marx, posits that religion can perpetuate social inequality by justifying oppression and maintaining the status quo, serving as an ideology of the ruling class. In this view, religion can become a basis for intergroup conflict, where dominant groups utilize religious narratives to maintain their societal position. Historically, anti-toleration laws in some colonies, for instance, prevented undesirable groups like Catholics and Jews from holding public office, embedding religious affiliation in law and custom, and leading to religious stratification. Criteria for determining established faiths often include longevity, existing for at least 75 years, universality, a certain number of adherents, charitable status, funds used for common good and not contravening laws, and the right to solemnize unions, indicating an organized community with rights, laws, and scriptures. While seemingly neutral, these criteria often implicitly or explicitly favor older, larger, and more institutionally integrated faiths, making it challenging for newer or minority religions to achieve comparable recognition. In the United States, Muslims are widely seen as facing discrimination by 58% of Americans and are viewed less warmly than other major religious groups, indicating a position lower in the societal religious hierarchy. The lack of widespread recognition of Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion is therefore not solely about internal Islamic practices or external misperceptions, but also about the inherent power dynamics within a religiously stratified society. When a dominant religious group holds power, it can implicitly or explicitly define what constitutes legitimate religion, often disadvantaging minority faiths. Islam's perceived difference, and the widespread belief that Muslims face discrimination suggest that Islam is positioned within a lower stratum in the religious hierarchy of some Western societies. This structural disadvantage means that even if individual misconceptions are addressed, the broader societal framework may still impede full recognition. This implies that achieving greater recognition for Islam may require not just internal efforts by Muslims, but also systemic changes in how society defines and accommodates religious diversity, challenging existing power structures and biases that privilege certain faiths over others. This struggle for recognition is, in part, a struggle against a form of structural racism, often termed Islamophobia, which manifests as anti-Muslim racism. Addressing misconceptions, current efforts, and challenges. Despite the pervasive misunderstandings, significant efforts are underway to foster greater understanding of Islam and challenge negative perceptions. These initiatives, however, face inherent difficulties rooted in the nature of misinformation and deeply ingrained biases. Overview of interfaith dialogue initiatives and their impact. Interfaith dialogue is widely recognized as a crucial mechanism for fostering understanding, building connections, and promoting peace and acceptance among diverse religious groups. Islamic texts themselves emphasize the importance of respectful communication, with the Quran encouraging dialogue with wisdom and kindness. Numerous initiatives exemplify successful efforts in this domain, such as the Aman Message, which promotes common ground among faiths, and the KICID Dialogue Center, which brings together Buddhists, Christians, Hindus, Jews, and Muslims for constructive conversation. In Lebanon, the Islamic Christian National Dialogue Committee serves as a notable example of successful interfaith cooperation. The Dialogue of Life, which focuses on everyday issues and shared social actions, has proven effective in uniting people and fostering mutual understanding, demonstrating that practical cooperation can build bridges where theological debate might be more challenging. These interfaith efforts are instrumental in challenging stereotypes and countering negative narratives perpetuated in media and political discourse. For Muslims, participation in interfaith dialogue is often viewed as a religious obligation, particularly in contexts where Islam is a minority faith and frequently misunderstood. However, the effectiveness of interfaith dialogue in gaining broader recognition for Islam is contingent on its ability to move beyond superficial pleasantries, to genuinely engage with and respect theological differences. While dialogue promotes common features such as brotherhood, love, compassion, tolerance, and mutual respect, it must also navigate fundamental theological divergences, such as Islam's view of previous scriptures as corrupted, or its strict tawhid contrasting with Trinitarian beliefs. The challenge lies in finding common ground for cooperation on social good, while respecting distinct theological truths without compromising core beliefs. This delicate balance, if mishandled, could inadvertently reinforce differences rather than bridge them. A sophisticated approach is required that fosters mutual understanding of why beliefs differ, not just that they differ, and focuses on shared values and actions for the common good. The role of education in fostering understanding. Education has historically held a central role in Islam, with early religious learning emphasizing the study of Arabic and the Quran. This highlights the internal value placed on knowledge within the Islamic tradition. Despite this, mainstream educational systems often lack comprehensive teachings about world religions, including Islam, which creates significant gaps in public understanding. This knowledge vacuum can then be readily filled by misinformation and stereotypes. In response to this deficit, various organizations are proactively working to educate the public. The Islamic Networks Group, ING, for example, provides educational resources about Islam. Similarly, university-based Muslim student associations, MSAs, actively strive to dismantle stereotypes and promote a more accurate understanding of Islam, fostering curiosity among non-Muslims. They organize events such as Misconceptions of Islam panels, directly addressing the prevalent misunderstandings. A well-informed understanding of diverse religious perspectives is recognized as a key factor in fostering interfaith dialogue and communal harmony. The disparity between Islam's internal emphasis on religious education and the external public education system's failure to provide comprehensive teachings creates a significant knowledge gap. Non-Muslims often lack foundational understanding, making them more susceptible to misinformation and stereotypes. While Muslim organizations are actively working to bridge this gap, their reach may be limited compared to mainstream educational institutions. This suggests a systemic failure in broader society's educational approach to religious literacy. Sustained, widespread recognition of Islam's legitimacy and endurance therefore requires integrating comprehensive, objective religious education into mainstream curricula. This would move beyond reactive debunking of misconceptions to proactive foundational understanding, equipping individuals with the knowledge to critically assess information about Islam, and fostering a more informed public discourse. Challenges in effectively countering misinformation and deeply ingrained biases. Despite concerted efforts, effectively countering misinformation and deeply ingrained biases about Islam remains a significant challenge. The rise of social media has facilitated the rapid spread of misinformation and stereotypes, reinforcing negative prejudices at an unprecedented speed. The sheer volume and velocity of false narratives on digital platforms make it incredibly difficult to contain and correct them. Deeply ingrained biases. often rooted in an in-group versus out-group mentality, where religion can be central to an individual's self-concept, contribute to prejudice. Islamophobia, understood as a form of racism, involves the othering and dehumanizing representation of Muslims. These biases are frequently subconscious and highly resistant to purely rational arguments. The media's power to influence public opinion can exacerbate the situation by consistently portraying undesirable, stereotypical, and one-sided images of Muslims and Islam. Even seemingly positive images can inadvertently produce meanings that justify exclusion and inequality, highlighting the subtle yet pervasive nature of media's negative impact. Political agendas further complicate matters, as Islamophobia is often exploited for political gain, creating a powerful incentive for its perpetuation. Moreover, the historical legacy of negativity toward Islam in Western thought, spanning centuries, contributes to deeply rooted biases. This means that current prejudices are not isolated incidents, but are built upon a long historical foundation. The sensationalism and lack of context prevalent in media coverage also contribute to skewed perceptions, making it difficult for the public to discern accurate information. Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon. Its historical roots trace back centuries. Post 9/11, it was significantly amplified by media and political rhetoric. This long history means that negative perceptions are not merely transient misunderstandings, but are deeply entrenched, potentially passed down through generations and reinforced by cultural narratives and institutional biases. The observation that older generations tend to hold more negative views, and that hate crimes persist at levels 5 times higher than pre-9/11 levels points to a systemic, rather than superficial, problem that requires sustained, long-term interventions. Countering this requires more than short-term campaigns. It necessitates a sustained, multi-generational effort that addresses historical grievances, challenges systemic biases, and promotes critical thinking about media consumption. This implies that the struggle for recognition is a long-term societal transformation project, not just an information deficit problem, demanding a comprehensive and persistent approach. Conclusion: pathways to enhance recognition and understanding. The limited recognition of Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion stems from a complex interplay of theological nuances, media amplification, historical legacies, cultural and linguistic barriers, the disproportionate impact of extremist actions, and underlying sociological dynamics of religious stratification. Islam's strict monotheism and unique interpretation of Abrahamic lineage, while foundational to the faith, present conceptual challenges for external understanding, often leading to misinterpretations or perceived contradictions with other faiths. Persistent negative media portrayals, particularly amplified post-9/11, have fostered and reinforced stereotypes linking Islam to violence and the oppression of women, frequently conflating diverse cultural practices with core religious tenets. The enduring legacies of historical conflicts, such as the Crusades, and simplified narratives of spread by the sword, continue to shape contemporary mistrust, overshadowing periods of coexistence, intellectual exchange, and voluntary conversions. Furthermore, Islam, often a minority religion in Western contexts, faces challenges rooted in societal power dynamics, religious prejudice, and an othering effect, which hinder its full legitimacy within existing social hierarchies and contribute to widespread discrimination. The disproportionate impact of a minority's extremist actions, frequently sensationalized and exploited by political agendas, overshadows the peaceful majority and fuels Islamophobia, creating a difficult environment for accurate perception. Finally, a general lack of comprehensive education about Islam in mainstream society, coupled with linguistic barriers in accessing primary texts, contributes to fundamental misunderstandings and leaves individuals susceptible to misinformation. Achieving greater recognition and understanding of Islam requires a multifaceted and sustained strategic approach. Proactive education. Integrating objective, comprehensive religious education into mainstream curricula is essential to build foundational understanding from a young age. This approach moves beyond reactive debunking of misconceptions to proactive knowledge building, fostering critical thinking and reducing susceptibility to stereotypes. Strategic communication and media advocacy. Actively challenging stereotypical media portrayals, promoting balanced narratives, and advocating for responsible journalism are crucial. This involves working with media outlets to ensure they distinguish between extremist actions and mainstream Islamic teachings, and empowering diverse Muslim voices to share authentic experiences. Deepened interfaith engagement. Fostering interfaith dialogue that moves beyond superficial commonalities to genuinely engage with and respect theological differences is vital. Such dialogue should focus on shared ethical values and collaborative social action for the common good, building bridges of understanding and cooperation despite doctrinal variations. Cultural bridge building. Promoting cultural exchange and direct interaction can normalize unfamiliar practices and highlight the rich diversity within Muslim communities. This explicitly distinguishes between cultural traditions and core religious principles, helping to dismantle the pervasive culture versus religion conflation. Addressing systemic Islamophobia. Recognizing and actively combating Islamophobia as a form of racism is imperative. This involves challenging discriminatory policies and societal biases that contribute to the othering and marginalization of Muslims, requiring a multi-pronged approach involving legal, social, and political interventions. Empowering Muslim voices. Supporting and amplifying the efforts of Muslim organizations and scholars who are actively working to educate the public and counter misconceptions is fundamental. Grassroots efforts by groups such as the Yaqeen Institute, Muslim student associations, and Islamic Networks Group are crucial for authentic representation and fostering dialogue. Ultimately, achieving greater recognition for Islam as a legitimate and enduring religion is a long-term, multifaceted endeavor. It necessitates sustained effort from both Muslim communities, through continued education and outreach, and broader society, through critical self-reflection, media literacy, and challenging systemic prejudices. This collective commitment is essential for fostering a more informed, respectful, and harmonious global landscape.